Is the 2-week ceasefire really the dawn of peace, or the suffocating silence before the storm? When Donald Trump smiled and announced he was temporarily laying down his butcher knife on April 7th, the global market seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. But do you really think a superpower pushed to the brink by the midterm elections would bow to a 10-point list that is almost equivalent to unconditional surrender? In this massive gamble that affects 1/5 of the global energy lifeline, are we witnessing a diplomatic victory or the countdown to the next even bloodier decapitation strike? Let us tear off the hypocritical mask of this 15-day window. On April 7th, Donald Trump announced to the world that he agreed to a two-way 2-week ceasefire with Iran. Shortly after, in the early hours of the 8th, Iran's Supreme National Security Council confirmed their acceptance of this proposal. On the surface, the global market seems to be able to relax a bit. But the question is, does Trump really want to stop fighting, or is he buying time to prepare for the next, more destructive military adventure? If you look closely at the news, you will find how absurd it is to use these compromises as a basis for negotiation. Tehran has presented a 10-point list. Even if the United States only agreed to 1/3 of it, Trump would absolutely be considered the #1 traitor in American history, signing something akin to a treaty of national humiliation. Therefore, clearing away the fog of diplomatic rhetoric, the answer most likely points to the latter. Trump is secretly brewing a new round of deadly strikes. To judge where this brief ceasefire is heading, we must first see clearly what each side in this grand chess game truly desires. For Trump, the algorithm in the Oval Office is extremely cold and simple. He must bring the damn oil prices down. The Strait of Hormuz, the waterway that strangles the global throat, carries about 1/5 of the world's oil shipments. This means the fate of over 20 million barrels of crude oil a day is tied to it. After the war broke out, traffic on this maritime artery basically came to a halt, causing localized necrosis in global supply chains. International oil prices skyrocketed from a mild range of about $70 before the war, hitting a suffocating peak of $119 on March 9th. Let us open the underlying logic of American politics. In past elections, oil prices equal votes is an unbreakable historical rule. You might recall the oil crisis in the 1970s. The long lines at gas stations not only destroyed the American economy, but directly pronounced the political death sentence of the Jimmy Carter administration, handing the presidency to Reagan. Today, Trump stands on the edge of the same cliff. Soaring inflation is draining the wallets of the middle class, and a massive 66% of the American public strongly wants to end this endless war as soon as possible. In the upcoming Republican midterm elections, the situation has reached a critical life-or-death moment that desperately needs to be reversed. In this geopolitical slaughterhouse, this 2-week ceasefire is by no means an olive branch of peace. It is nothing but a hypocritical excuse from a political gambler asking the dealer to pause the shuffle before he loses his shirt. A politician's brief desire for peace often has nothing to do with human compassion, but stems from a deep fear of losing power. Let us turn our eyes to the other side of the negotiating table. In stark contrast to Washington's anxiety over oil prices, Tehran has laid out a 10-point list that is enough to send chills down the spines of the generals at the Pentagon. This list not only demands the lifting of all sanctions, the unfreezing of overseas assets, and the receipt of war reparations, but its core demand is that the U.S. military completely withdraw from the region, and that the Iranian armed forces coordinate control of the Strait of Hormuz, ultimately writing all of this into a UN Security Council resolution. Do you smell the implication here? This is not a temporary ceasefire agreement at all. It is an ultimatum forcing the American empire to completely exit the Middle East. To understand the lethal power of this 10-point list, we need to turn the hands of time back to 1980. At that time, then President Jimmy Carter laid out the famous Carter Doctrine in his State of the Union address, explicitly declaring that any attempt by an outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the United States of America, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force. In the more than 40 years since then, to protect this imperial energy lifeline, the United States has invested an immeasurable amount of blood and treasure in the Middle East. just maintaining the strategic deterrence of CENTCOM at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, along with the daily patrols of the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, consumes tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer money every single year. America's Middle East hegemony is not a piece of paper, but a geopolitical fortress forcefully cast with the military deterrence of 11 carrier strike groups and a sky full of petrodollars. Today, Iran's demands are equivalent to telling Washington, do not try to repair this fortress anymore. I want you to tear down its load-bearing walls directly. Acknowledging Iran's regional dominance and substantively ending the military presence the United States has built in the Middle East over 40 years directly strikes at the most fragile foundation of American hegemony. On one side, the Trump administration only wants oil prices to fall and to bow out gracefully. On the other side, Tehran wants a structural reversal, completely reshaping the Middle East order. At the poker table of international politics, when one side wants to win today's chips and the other side wants to flip the whole table over, this fundamental mismatch in demands means that a 2-week ceasefire is almost impossible to naturally transition into long-term peace. It is more like a halftime break, with both sides gathering strength for the next phase. America's hegemony in the Middle East is like an aging body kept alive by tens of billions of dollars in military spending. And the 10-point list presented by Iran is tantamount to the hand of death pulling the plug on the ventilator. When the heartbeat of an empire can only be maintained through compromise and gasps for air, is this the charity of peace or the descent of the twilight of hegemony? Since the option of all-out war has been completely blocked off, who will be the first to break the deadlock during this brief ceasefire window? The answer is without suspense. It will most likely be Donald Trump. This is absolutely not because he is tougher than before, but because he has been firmly locked onto a specific tactical track, a deadly script of deceive, strike, and withdraw. Let us do some cold calculations. These short 40 days of conflict have already burned through a full $35 billion of the Pentagon's war funds, resulting in the deaths of at least 13 to 15 American soldiers, with 365 injured. And what has this bought? It has bought Trump a plummeting and pitiful 29% public approval rating. Sinking into the quagmire of total war is tantamount to political suicide for America today. However, total compromise is equally impossible. Bowing to Tehran's 10-point list means admitting defeat, which is a political price he simply cannot bear. Caught in a dilemma, he has only one option left, after the ceasefire window closes, to execute another round of deceive, strike, and withdraw. Looking back at the past few years, you will find that Trump has developed a mature, low-cost model of military adventurism. Let us trace this bloody timeline, from using an MQ-9 Reaper drone to tear Qasem Soleimani to pieces in early 2020, to the later extreme pressure on the Maduro regime in Venezuela, and then to the death of Supreme Leader Khamenei and deafening airstrikes this time. Every single time he repeats the same tactic. Before making a move, he releases false signals of negotiation to paralyze the opponent, then concentrates an absolute advantage in intelligence to carry out a precise decapitation strike, and finally declares victory and quickly pulls out before the market can react. This style of attack requires low investment, yields quick results, and brings extremely high public relations benefits, perfectly fitting the realistic constraints of a superpower that cannot afford a large-scale ground war. Looking at past data, these thunderous targeted killings can often bring a short-term poll bounce of 5 to 8 percentage points for the president in just 72 hours. Faced with these tactics, Trump's smooth cerebral cortex seems unable to accommodate any more complex long-term strategic and tactical planning. This path dependence on the deceive, strike, and withdraw tactic is like the empire's fatal addiction to short-acting dopamine. Every time he clicks the launch button, he can get a brief political climax and a satisfaction of vanity, but after the drug wears off, what is left behind is an even more rotten geopolitical ruin. He will instinctively replicate the same script in the next round of the game like a red-eyed prisoner addicted to gambling. When a superpower loses its strategic focus planned for a century, leaving only tactical speculation in pursuit of a 72-hour poll bounce, every Hellfire missile it fires at its enemies is actually overdrawing its own national destiny. And for Iran, this brutal war did not crush them, but instead used the most cruel method to completely compress the political space for compromise within Tehran. During these long 40 days, American warplanes circled like hungry vultures, dropping bombs and missiles in over 3,400 airstrikes, with the flames indiscriminately covering 24 provinces across Iran. From power plants to oil refining facilities, a massive amount of core infrastructure suffered systematic destruction. In particular, the death of Supreme Leader Khamenei in a precise decapitation strike brought this country a heavy blow it has never experienced since its founding. But if you think bombs can bring submission, then you really do not understand the underlying nature of the Persian nation. We need to go back to the equally brutal Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s. At that time, Saddam Hussein also naively believed that a few rounds of fierce airstrikes could cause the newborn Islamic Republic to fall apart. However, the 8-year-long holy defense instead forged the socio-psychological roots of Iran's resilience under fire. History has proven countless times that extreme external pressure is always the perfect catalyst for internal cohesion. After this carpet bombing, those pro-American voices that still harbored a trace of illusion about the West at the beginning of the war were instantly leveled and completely marginalized. The emotions of the people completed a tempering of shared hatred in the ashes of the ruins. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba, stepped right on the grand narrative of revenge and resistance to the end, quickly and ruthlessly solidifying domestic consensus. The discourse power of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has been unprecedentedly strengthened. In today's Tehran, any political force attempting to beg the United States for mercy will be directly nailed to the pillar of treason. After paying such a tragic and bloody price, Iran will never easily give up the most deadly trump card in its hand, the Strait of Hormuz. This is a truly low-cost, high-yield strategic lever. Looking at the specific data, about 21 million barrels of crude oil pass through this narrow waterway every day, directly maintaining the energy lifelines of massive economies such as China, Japan, South Korea, and India. Iran simply does not need a symmetrical aircraft carrier fleet. Relying solely on the network of shore-based anti-ship missiles deployed along the winding coastline and the Wolfpack-like suicide speedboats, it can form a substantive strangulation threat against the global energy artery using the lowest military cost. They have successfully leveraged the biggest inflation anxiety within the United States while also demonstrating unprecedented united front value. This has not only shown the absolute resilience of Tehran to the axis of resistance in the Middle East, but also made the Gulf Arab states, and even energy importing countries as far away as Europe and Asia, soberly realize that Iran's signature must be on the transit pass for the Strait of Hormuz. If they were to completely abandon those 10 core demands just in exchange for a 2-week pause in bombing, it would not only be a betrayal of the dead, but also a crazy squandering of the hard-won geopolitical united front value. Mojtaba cannot do this, nor does he dare to. When both sides have nowhere left to retreat, this 15-day ceasefire can only lead to the next more violent round of conflict, and the one to strike first will still be Trump, who is hijacked by votes. Waiting for this brief negotiation period to end fruitlessly, he will inevitably bring out that familiar script, again releasing false diplomatic signals to paralyze Tehran, carrying out a precise decapitation strike, and then declaring victory before the global market collapses. And this time, the target in the crosshairs will most likely be Mojtaba himself. Today's ceasefire agreement is nothing but a shot of low-quality anesthetic injected into a panicked global market. But anesthetics always wear off. The giant wheel of history never changes its course because of a 2-week pause. These brief 15 days are not the prelude to peace, but the interval for 2 gamblers to reload their bullets at the poker table. When the anxiety of American hegemony crashes into Iran's survival bottom line with no way back, the rolling waves of the Strait of Hormuz will no longer carry oil and wealth, but will only brew a monstrous storm capable of burying the old order, and the countdown has already begun.